Well, good day, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's FS Club webinar. I'm dialing in here from London, and I'm delighted to have Phil Rofe, the CEO of P2 FinCrime, here with me today. And Phil's subject is what keeps financial crime professionals awake at night. And when you think about it, that is a heck of a subject, especially today as we're seeing a burgeoning of crime all across the web, and some of it due to the pandemic. Now, you know me, I'm Michael Mainelli. I'm one of the directors of Zien, and it really is my privilege to be able to host so many of these webinars, which range widely across technology, economics, and finance. And today, of course, all three meet: technology, the economics of crime, and finance. So it's a big program. Our sponsors are particularly tolerant, and I might point out that Phil and the team at P2 FinCrime are silver sponsors as well, and we're delighted when we get the opportunity to host a sponsor to boot. So that's an excellent opportunity for us today. And I will just say that the normal regime applies. My job is to get out of the way and let you hear from our expert, Phil, backed up by his team. Phil's going to be speaking for about 20 minutes, and then we have sufficient time, hopefully, for Q&A. We have quite a few people registered today, well over 140. So please do get your questions, comments, and observations in early, and I'll feed them into a discussion with Phil starting at about 4:25. A few obvious questions. One, yes, there are slides, and they are already posted. You can see that in the chat room, and they will be up there on the website where you're registered. Secondly, the recording will be going up in about 48 hours and will be available to you and any colleagues or whomever you wish to share it with. And finally, to ask your questions and comments, please use the GoToWebinar facility. I'm online here with you, and whilst I may see your Signal, WhatsApp, WeChat, or email messages, it will be too late. So please do use the Q&A facility here. All of those questions and it will be sent to Phil with your email attached to it. So if you've got a specific or detailed question you'd like him to answer, but don't want to take it here online, just send it in the chat facility and it will get to him later today. So with no more ado, if I might, Phil, the floor is very much yours.
Thanks, Michael. I'm from the south of London at the moment, so I'm going to apologise in advance. If we do get an Amazon delivery, you will hear my dog racing out to meet them. So watch out for that. I also apologise for any dodgy Wi-Fi. We've done what we can. All my family are off of Xboxes, so hopefully it'll hang out. As you know, FS Club are a bit different to many other webinars. I'm not going to bore you with my life story. When I took my first steps, the swimming badges I won, and my meteoric rise through various different companies ending up here. If you want to know more about me, then please check out my LinkedIn profile and do get in touch. The 5-second summary is I've got 30 years in financial services, the last 11 in financial crime, and worked on the front line of a number of banks around the globe. Now help them out when they're under regulatory scrutiny. So whilst I knew what was keeping me awake at night, I did call a few of my friends who are still working in large global institutions to check their concerns and issues. And the next few slides summarise those. And rather than just putting up a big list of issues, I'll put them into a few different groups. Unusually, I'm going to start with a few personal concerns because I actually think that you probably share them with me. So I've got those up front. And then we'll talk about a few corporates and issues, some scams, some stuff on the horizon, and some no regrets actions that I think would be a good idea to get on with. Hopefully somewhere in there, there'll be some helpful thoughts for you to take away. So Michael, in the true Chris Whitty style, next slide, please. Thank you very much. So some personal concerns. I have 3 sons. One of them is at uni at the moment, and he mentioned Maslow's hierarchy of needs to me recently, which took me right back to my own studies. Maslow puts personal security in the second block after food, water, shelter, etc. I do know that chatting with other people, there are some real concerns about protecting those around us. Some things that we take for granted as financial crime professionals, such as spotting phishing emails or hanging up on a scam call, blocking a fake text, aren't as clear to those who don't live and breathe this stuff every day. So how do we share information and knowledge without scaring those around us? I pass on forward updates to my parents, aunts, uncles, when I get them and they look sensible and easy to follow. Social media links and emails are often the best way. As a result of this, my mother has taken the scam threat seriously, and she has a whistle by the phone that she blows really loudly when she gets a scam call before hanging up. I can't only imagine what that's like on the other end, particularly when it's not a scam call, but that works for her. My main worry is that my sons get caught in one of these scams. They're active on social media, as I'm sure many of our children are, and they use platforms that I don't really use, like TikTok and Snapchat, so I don't get to see the scams coming through. I see stuff on Facebook and Instagram, and I do share them, hoping that the triggers are the same. I know the scams are out there. One of my sons recently asked me about GameStop, and the fact is some of his mates were buying shares because they'd seen something on social media about some people making thousands. And should he follow suit and invest? I explained to him by the time it had filtered down to him, the real money had probably already been made, and the late comers would probably be cleaned out. Wait to see if he took my advice or not as to whether he's got any money left at the end of term. It's the speed of design and release that demonstrate how agile the criminals are. The fake vaccine scams came out about the same time as the real ones went live on the NHS websites, playing on people's fear and also their trust in the NHS name. I am really pleased to see the government is now running ads on social media and in the press, for example, flagging that vaccines are always free. It's good to see them catching up and putting those information out there. Other piece on this slide, we talk about fake job ads and fake property ads. Again, playing on people's fears and those that are vulnerable, seeking employment or places to live, hooking them into paying excess fees and then dumping them. Once that hundreds, if not thousands of pounds are at stake, which is why this stuff is so attractive to the criminals and why they can really divert their resources to try and go after us in these spaces. We're able to have a couple of polls during the webinar, and I think we'll go on to one now. On the next slide, please, Michael.
That's great.
It's a simple poll, really. Just wondered if any of you had received a scam attempt. So if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
Great, we've launched that poll. It's interesting you point out, particularly that last one on fake property ads, Phil. Interestingly, in our family, just the other week, my daughter stumbled across one. She detected it, but the fact that people put these up means that they expect that they'll work with at least a significant minority to make money. Anyway, as ever with the FS Club, 80% of the audience have voted. I'm just about to close the poll, giving a second or two for folks to come in. And I'm afraid we live in a very scam-rich environment. As you can see here, 72% have had all three. And I think you and I can vote. But at least if you could just hand out your mother's number so we don't call her, that'd be useful.
Yeah, I will. Interesting, 1% hadn't. I think there's a very lucky 1% from this call. And unfortunately, those results do play true, that it's a very prevalent thing out there. And as you said, Michael, it's a numbers game. So the reason these things are successful is they just pump out so many. You only have to have a very small hit rate to actually make money in this space. The slide we've got up and running now is really talking about money muling and spoofing. There's some data there from Action Fraud, which runs up to the September 2020 and showed an enormous increase in activity over that time. I'm expecting it even go to even higher when they get the 2021 numbers. There's a graphic on the right-hand side which talk about how money muling works. Again, just a very simple set of statements. You can see why they go after it with the amount of funds that are available. And another type of fraud is cuckoo smurfing, where criminals place money into accounts and unwittingly involve that individual in laundering criminal funds. At the bottom, the little panel, EMMA 5, this was a money muling activity that took place in 2019. So this was a large-scale financial crime set of actions that were taken place by the regulatory authorities. It's great to see so much success. So 31 countries were involved, 650 banks and 17 banking associations involved, leading to 228 arrests, catching 386 herders, so those are the people that are driving the mules, and actually identifying 3,833 mules and 4,700 victims. Just in this action alone, 12.9 million of losses were prevented. And whilst those are the hard stats, you can only guess how many lives were saved, either actually or theoretically, in terms of those people being found and helped on the money mule side. So a huge exercise European-wide and a great outcome, but just one of many. So these little graphics are the sorts of things I share with my family, just because it's simple, easy to understand, and sort of demystifies it. Michael, next slide, please. He asked the question, really, what would I do? Sorry, I was just on that one there. I do share headlines. I do encourage cascades, and I do share the pictures when I get them. So looking at the corporate challenges, this is pretty much a back to basics slide that I'm sure could have been written back in 2009, but unfortunately is still relevant now because institutions are still falling into the same traps. It's all the basics around: do you understand the risks? Have you identified them? Have your company set an appetite? Do you know what you are within and outside appetite? And do you have investment where you have problems that are currently outside? And do stakeholders within the organisations understand that they have a role to play in managing financial crime risk? The stats in the middle from the report show that despite it being 2020, this problem is not going away. So last year, 28 financial institutions were fined for money laundering violations. The total fines were $3.2 billion. Q3 was the highest activity, and no surprise that the US remained the most active, levying around half of the fines. Interesting to see that the Australians, who were previously held up as a shining beacon of compliance a few years ago, are now having to put their house in order with fines and improvement programs in all main Australian financial institutions. You can tell when the tide is turning as the phone starts to ring, and myself and a few of my colleagues started getting phone calls from Australian headhunters 2 or 3 years ago, which is obviously the precursor to the regulatory action. A little bit closer to home in the UK, the FCA settled with Commerzbank last year with a fairly hefty fine. And only just recently, bottom right, you can see that NatWest are back in the spotlight again, having had some challenges in the past. It's going to be very interesting to see how this one plays out, particularly as NatWest are on a fairly hefty UK operations downsize and leveraging technology and offshore resources in this space. So it's a particularly interesting one that's going to run for a while, I would imagine. Next slide, please, Michael. Thank you. We mentioned scams before, but it isn't just the NHS, job ads and property ads that are subject to scams. The criminals have realised there are significant sums in targeting the investment space. With interest rates really low, investors are seeking the best returns. This often means switching investments between companies to get the best deals. This ironically means that the savvy investors who are seeking good returns are becoming the victims versus the passive investors who just let their ISAs, their investment savings accounts, just languish on negligible returns. Often the ISA pots can run into tens of thousands of pounds. The criminal only has to offer a few decimal points better return to catch the eye of the investor because the interest rates are so low. So we not only now have to look for fake websites, but also fake comparison sites, which are now in operation. And I would really challenge you to spot the difference. It is very, very tricky. The basic web page looks totally legitimate. The click-throughs into forms look real, and they're often copied direct from source. The callback sounds fine, and then the investor is caught and the money is gone. Unfortunately, in even more extreme cases, there are massive gains to be targeted from pension pots, which can run into hundreds of thousands of pounds after a lifetime of diligent saving. Again, fake comparison sites, good but not outrageous returns, which look really legitimate and may have links to legitimate sites. But once the investor has clicked through, the criminal machine will play every single trick in the book to try and get the money. They'll claim that deals are closing soon, changes in tax are coming, which will take away this benefit in return. The fund is nearly full, so you must act now. Put down a small sum to secure your space, and the pressure just piles on until the investor clicks, and then the disappearing act happens, and the funds bounce around the globe through shell companies and offshore areas, unfortunately never to be seen again. And because the investor was complicit in the release and transfer, it becomes very difficult for them to get their funds back. And there's lots of ongoing activities in the UK to try and help them. But what is the bank's role in this sort of space? What can banks and financial institutions do? They have sophisticated detection tools. They can try and stop people moving money out without authorization. They can put hurdles in place to support the customers. But really, the banks can't get in the way. This is the customer's money and they can do what they want. But unfortunately, they're left picking up the pieces at the end. I'm really pleased to see that there's progress being made, particularly with Google Ads, which have been used in some of these fake sites previously. There's a link on the page where you can see the letter that was recently sent to the FCA by Google saying, we understand this is a problem and this is what we're doing about it. And our friends at Aviva have done quite a lot of activity in this space. Have a quick look on the next slide. So Aviva have invested significant amounts of money in trying to support their customers and anyone who wants to click on the Aviva site really to spot fake investments, which is clearly, I now understand, is a serious issue. They've got dedicated pages with all sorts of issues. You can see on the panel on the left what to do if you to avoid getting scammed, how to spot problems, and what to do, where to look for real legitimate information. On the right hand side are the latest lists of fake websites linked to Aviva, which they've been working to take down. I'm pleased to see they have taken down most, but just an incredibly long list of sites that the investors could have clicked on and then be in a spiral of challenge. And this is just Aviva. They are clearly quite proactive in this space. But interestingly, I'm not sure what other companies are doing, investment companies and ISA providers, and how up to speed and communicative they are on this issue. And this leads us into our next poll, please, Michael.
Indeed, and just here to launch that poll.
Thanks.
Great. So has your bank or investment manager made you aware of potential spoof or fake websites that you might fall victim to? Yet again, the speed of our audience always amazes me, Phil. Over half have voted, and we didn't even make it to 10 seconds.
No problem.
So well over 3/4 have voted. I'll give it just a few more seconds before I close the poll. Now just closing the poll. And I'll present the results with nearly 90% of the audience. Basically, 61% say no.
Yeah, and that's really quite frightening, isn't it? Because this is quite a financially aware audience, and yet they don't feel they've been contacted by their bank or investment company with this problem. And just looking at Aviva, it clearly is a problem. It's highly unlikely that Aviva are the only ones who have been targeted. So please just sort of beware and take extra care when you are navigating around this sort of stuff. And what's on the horizon? So looking a little bit further forward, if you're involved in financial crime, what are the current issues you should be looking out for? We touched briefly on human trafficking and modern slavery, and whilst they have been perennial issues, we're now looking at how financial services can use the tools to help root out the criminals and spot the money and track the money that's behind them. Financial institutions do see the flow of the money and do have some very powerful tools now that can be deployed in this place to actually see the global movement. Similarly, with regards to the movement of fake or restricted or endangered goods, there is always a money trail that can be followed. And if enough organizations collaborate, you can actually reach all around the world and spot and hit the smugglers where the only place it's going to hurt them, which is in the pocket, stopping their ability to trade. Interestingly, the cloud has been seen as a really good source of improved resilience and cost saving in organizations as they move away from their sort of in-house server farms. But we're hearing that there's a bit of a pushback now from some countries and companies who are concerned about their data being held on with US companies and potentially US servers. Whilst it is a theoretical concern, because I'm sure those companies would tell you that they've never released the data, we are hearing that some are seeking decentralized stores of data now. So an interesting challenge that the cloud was seen as the answer to everything, and people are now pushing back a little bit against it. Similarly, on the green issues, coming more to the fore as the sort of movement gains speed. Lots of pressure on companies investing in fossil fuels, etc. So again, using the DFIs as a route to drive a change in behaviour. On the geopolitical side, previously the approaches to sanctions were quite blunt, and they're now becoming more refined, which is an interesting challenge in itself. So a couple of things there on the horizon, and we'll look at one more in a moment in a bit more detail. Next slide, please, Michael. So we talked a little bit about modern slavery previously, and there's quite a lot of activity in the UK, at least, on the supply chain side. So you can see there's an extract from the Modern Slavery Act, which came in 2015. Last year, the government pushed ahead and said that any public bodies with a decent sized budget would have to report on the steps they'd taken to prevent slavery. So good progress there. And then this year, the government again reporting that they're going to start to levy fines for organisations who are not transparent. So trying to definitely do some things in this space, which is interesting and hopefully positive and will be adopted elsewhere. Looking globally, the headline on the top right, boohoo, under pressure from US regulators who are looking at the supply chain and trying to drive out issues in that space. And then at the bottom, supply chains themselves becoming, as we would expect, becoming a target of hackers because they are often long and complex and seen as a weak link. In all of these spaces, there are roles for financial services. Once funds are gained, there is always a money trail. The technology is coming on leaps and bounds, and our ability to monitor patterns and flows is improving as we look at sort of big data solutions. Any ability to restrict access to market, restrict access to funds causes those criminals problems. Next slide, please, Michael. Final slide, actually, which is good. We mentioned a little bit about what actions you can take. So in these sort of scary times with all the doom and gloom, what can you do? Well, you can definitely share some of this. You can talk to people, you can repost, share interesting articles, because the more we know, the better. But there are definitely some data actions that can be undertaken. A lot of this comes back to data, and the better data quality you have, the more ability you'll have to leverage systems and processes to drive out these kind of problems. You can get all the data in one place rather than all over the place in distributed systems. You can work out what the key bits of that data are, and over time fill in those gaps. Often there are error patterns because people fast keyed new customers or things were uploaded in blocks, and so you may have dates set at 010101, etc., which are easy to find and can then be fixed. As you move new data in, you can fix it via the extract, transfer, and load systems to try and identify problems and solve them. Make sure that all new customers, stopping the bleed effectively, anyone new coming in has all their data up to date with the key attributes filled in, and then make the tools you've got work really hard to try and spot problems and patterns. It's great to copy the big guys, but don't assume that because you've got a big box that everything is going to be fixed. There are some really good, agile, flexible partners out there who are happy to run proof of concepts for you, which you have to accept may fail, but ultimately may help you solve a particular problem that you've got in the data space. I think we're on to the final kind of thank you and well done slide. We are.
We are indeed. Well, thank you very much. That's a very, very stimulating opening, Phil. And we've got quite a few questions here, folks. Again, just type them into the GoTo questionnaire facility. So Michael Levy, who's quite an expert on this, says they send some. This is referring to your poll about financial services provider. They send some data when you log into remote banking, but not the generality of scams like the Aviva site, only those that abuse them. So how realistic is it to expect our financial services providers to be informing us about all scams?
Yeah, I don't think it's realistic, but there are definitely themes out there. So they have privileged access to us, they have secure channels, and whilst the challenge probably for them is being selective enough with us and providing insights where it can help us, ultimately to help them as well. So we don't want 5 emails a day, but there may be a roundup, once a month on the themes that are coming through. So you're quite right, we wouldn't expect to be told about everything, but even just getting people thinking that way and getting the mindset of an edge of suspicion when you receive something, not just blindly following a text or a prompt. Is just helping the general population to move a little bit more towards understanding, rather than expecting to solve and spot everything, which would never happen.
I mean, this is me personally, Phil. I'm a little sort of torn on this, because if everybody like Aviva did that, then you'd have a plethora of, a few hundred websites doing this, all with contradictory stuff and different graphics and using different names for what are effectively the same scam, and also operating to some degree as a training manual for financial criminals. Is there not an opportunity for the industry to cooperate?
Yeah, I think there should be. You're quite right. This shouldn't be an area of competitive advantage. It should be cooperation. Getting the companies together is a challenge. Some of the all-party parliamentary groups have managed to do that. There's a number of APVGs running at the moment in key areas. So yeah, I think there's opportunity for collective as well as individual action, just to try and catch the eye of the investor. It may be that some gravitate towards the central advice and some will gravitate towards the local advice. So I think more is probably better, without obviously recognizing the potential to overload.
Well, Hugh Purser's interested in catching them young. So
Yeah.
exactly, Phil, do you know, is this subject being taught in any way in the classroom in schools today?
I think that some of the organisations do sort of money matters basics. And I've actually seen one of my sons who's doing his A-levels at the moment is studying this as part of one of his business degrees, in terms of the various different places you can get funds and the risks that go with it. But I don't necessarily think it's getting down right to the sort of early savings. I think luckily there are some really good products out there that are teaching kids good financial disciplines, and it may be that you can tack this sort of thing onto it, a little bit like stranger danger for the kind of the wider, scarier stuff. But you just think about, they're so easy to exploit and often move in sort of herds. And so that's the challenge with the younger people, I think. But I've got young relatives who are kind of little, just getting into their teens, and I'm already sharing via an aunt and an uncle this sort of stuff, to say, when you think it's appropriate, please share it with them, rather than forcing it on myself. But yeah, I think the earlier the better. Just a bit of savvy in this space would be great.
Chris David makes a couple of points. One is a salutary reminder: never mind the fake websites. What about outright fraud in the regulated financial space? Don't forget RBS, GRG, and things like that.
Yeah.
But he does go on. You had a lot of comments about AML in the fines, right? But what are the other challenges for the corporates beyond the AML? And are people being fined at all for not being complicit in this scam? But there's a scam going on, it's part of it, but what we got in was legit, what came out was legit. What's our problem?
Yeah, I think AML is kind of a blanket term. It would be financial crime that's probably more relevant. The sanctions areas are the ones that as you know really drive the big fines. I think general corporate governance and corporate behaviour, their standards are expected to increase over time. And organisations being held to account for failure in this space, a little bit like the NatWest point that was made earlier, can only drive that up. If you can get it to board level, and you can get it of interest to board, either via personal accountability, the fines have made an impact, but whether it's enough of an impact, who can tell? But yeah, very difficult to drive and police at that level. Corporate governance is an ongoing challenge, and doing the best for the shareholder versus the customer is a constant battle, I would think, in most organisations.
Ian Sheridan reminds us that BlackBerry is famous for its data security. So there was a point at which we had the kind of the security of the BlackBerry versus the smartphones with all of their multiple apps. What particular advice do you have for corporates with regard to smartphones and apps on them?
I think you have to invest an enormous amount of time and care in that space, because the ease of everybody wants the user experience to be slick and simple, but the trade-off is against security. We've worked with one organisation really recently, that put an enormous amount into the customer experience, but then balanced it with the security side as well. So I think you have to be running this stuff in parallel with two-factor authentication, or the secure encrypted channels, in order to keep your data and your customers' data secure. You only have to look at the damage that was done to TSB, who were at kind of peak Twitter troll kind of thing when they had the security breach there. That's a very salient kind of learning point in terms of speed to market versus security. At the time, we spoke to the guys afterwards who were over there, and they said that they had more than 4 times the number of customer complaints than they had customers. So people were just piggybacking on this wave of anger in order to get hits and retweets, and actually not being customers at all. So they were just, completely buried by the Twitter storm that overtook it. So it's a really good one to note, that don't skimp on security, because it will come back and bite you hard.
Richard Parler is a bit of a cynic, but he points out, that the SEC reports that only around 50% of the fines that it levies are actually paid. Do you have any knowledge of whether or not in the UK that's different? Have these fines actually been paid?
Yeah, I think that, so. I mean, the US as well has a fairly hefty discount model. I think in the UK you get 30% off if you pay within a certain amount of time. But these things take a long time to negotiate and a long time to come to market. By the time we hear about them, or there's a press release, it's probably been running for 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 years. And during that time, there will have been lots of actions and mitigations. So actually, when you look at the fines themselves, the company are allowed to explain what they've done in the interim period. But I think in the UK, the FCA is fairly hot and offers a fairly hefty discount for paying. And it's obviously a smaller market than the SEC has to police. And so I would anticipate that they can probably get their arms around, or they can probably drive compliance a bit quicker.
Martin White is asking, whom should we report scandals to? He has a text from last week claiming to be from TSB, asking me to click through if I don't recognize the action they are reporting. Where do we do this?
So the Action Fraud is a really good place. They've got places you can forward text onto. This is the UK. If you're in a different area, then just checking in with your regulator, because they've all got websites that will receive forwarded emails and forwarded texts that they will add to their kind of bank of knowledge. And it's definitely worth doing, because it just helps them to see what the way the criminals are developing. But yeah, there's always a short form forward that can be done to build up the data, which is key.
Do you have any, everybody here is interested in enforcement. Do you have any data or statistics on enforcement at all?
Well, I think
before I do that, I've got a little incoming here from Micah Levy. Apparently there's a place you can go to, report@phishing.gov.uk, and I'll spell phishing, which is PHISHING. So report@phishing.gov.uk. Sorry, back to enforcement figures, because certainly I've reported quite a few over the years, and it just seems to go into a dead box.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things we're definitely wrestling with in the UK. It would fall into a similar category to the suspicious activity reports. And the number of SARS is rising, which is good. However, the central evaluation and administration of those is very challenging. So there's an all-party parliamentary group at the moment looking at SARS and trying to overhaul the whole process, so that organisations can submit data in a structured way that can be evaluated more easily than a free-form template that's been used previously. So I do think there is recognition that just using SARS as a pure example, that needs to be improved, and pleased to see that that's probably been running for about a year now, and will hopefully come with a set of recommendations that institutions can adopt quickly, and will allow the data that is submitted to be crunched through much faster. There are some stunning tools out there now, but if you can get it in a logical way, you can definitely get the results out quicker as well.
Mm-hmm. It was interesting, you had that rather extensive list of spoof sites that Aviva knows. I too have tried to help some friends who've had some really strange spoof sites that do seriously detract either from the reputation of their business or directly draw business away. And again, I found it very difficult. If somebody as big as Aviva can't get these shut down, what's the
Yeah.
hope of the average Joe?
But I think the good thing is they have. So, but on that list, if you try any of them, they have been shut down now. That they obviously keep them on there as a kind of rolling warning, if you like. But very difficult when these sites are hosted outside, core domains. And I think it is a case of looking at the website name, tracking back to the trusted home site, and making sure you can get to it from that. It's a little bit like hanging up when the bank phones you and tries to get you to do something. Hang up and ring from a different phone. It's if you're making a significant decision which involves financial investments, etc., then you don't just go to Google and put in a term and follow it through and transfer the money. You need to go to what is a trusted site, which you can find from the FCA and from the core host sites as well.
One of our old timers from West London, Ian Harris, is kind of curious. 25, 30 years ago, digital certificates were all the rage. So, where do they stand today? They were supposed to allow me to identify specifically that I was on one track with any particular entity on the web.
Yeah, I think he probably knows more about that than me, to be honest. You hope that the trusted sort of HTTPS and then the legitimate site will get you there. I think that's if you hover over, it's the classic, isn't it? When you get an email, if you hover over the email address, it'll tell you what the true address is behind it. Looking at the name on the web page and looking for those misspellings, Aviva with 2 V's or something like that that just catches you. The good thing is that companies are doing more and more pen testing and education of their people to try and look for this stuff. But no, I'm afraid I can't help with digital certificates. It was probably a little bit earlier in my career that they were coming through.
He's very old, Ian.
I couldn't possibly comment.
Oh, right. Lasse Instefjord Alsvag is curious. He's interested in getting into a career fighting financial crime from sort of a typical plain payments career. Where would you recommend that one would apply in today's environment to make the biggest impact? Would it be the police? Would it be move into politics, move into a bank, media, FS providers, consultancy? Wow. What would you recommend to make the most impact? What sector can really pull it off?
Kind of a broad market, isn't it? I think you need to move through them. So I've seen people in law enforcement have had a good career on the front line and then move into industry and bring that knowledge and network with them. Anywhere you can build a network that's cross industry, cross government, cross agency, I think you can add real value. Often we sit in a silo and know the people around us, and it's a bit of an echo chamber. If you can operate across a number of different areas with a network of sort of trusted colleagues, I guess that's where you would have the most impact. And that's probably where, moving law enforcement into government, into industry, into consulting, those people who have moved across industries. I mean, on the page now is a picture with myself and Peter Hazelwood. Peter Hazelwood started out in the police in Hong Kong, I think it was, and then moved into industry and back into consulting and out to industry again. So an example of a career that spanned several different verticals, if you like. So I think that's probably where you can make the most difference, because you see the problem from different angles and you build up a network of people who you can access, really.
Mm-hmm. Very oddly, I spent this morning on looking at some of the inserts, particularly onboarding systems and apps. What do you think is kind of the most exciting piece of new technology out there that might make a material difference to fraud?
So I think the prevention of fraud. I think it's the click-through services that are now offered with ID and V that you can do securely. It's the balance between ease and security, I think, is critical. If you move up into the sort of macro level, some of the companies that are operating with big data solutions now, so instead of having a big box in the corner that the lights flashed and look for very specific patterns and trends, these cloud-based units just look for flows and trying to spot different patterns in the flow that you would never think of looking for. So Quantexa are doing some good, really interesting stuff at the moment, having some great success, which means that traditional transaction monitoring, which was a bit of an art rather than a science, is becoming much clearer. And instead of getting thousands of false positives, you can look at for patterns that stand out and then interrogate the pattern and find the anomaly. So I think at the macro level, we look at that sort of thing. At the micro level, it's the quality of the apps and the interfaces and your ability to link to the DVLA or to other trusted systems that mean that you can hopefully get through some of the pain of ID and V and other aspects of onboarding, and then stay up to date as well. So it's all well and good getting a legitimate customer in. You need to be happy that that customer continues to be legitimate throughout their life cycle with you, rather than being handed off to somebody else who takes on that persona.
One of Zien's interns is asking, why do companies' compliance, anti-fraud, anti-money laundering, and similar programs fail? Is it the programs themselves, internal cultures? What are the issues arising that seem to mean these are so long? I mean, the SARS thing has been going on since I did a study on AML 17 years ago. We still had this over-reporting backlog, basically just wasting the information that's being expensively gathered. It doesn't seem to make much progress, is it? What would you attribute that?
I think it's because it's a very large and complex issue, they tend to have very large and complex programs. And as we know, any large and complex program that runs for multiple years will often fail in certain areas because the business itself or the technology is moving on and they try and catch up. So I do think that if you can be targeted about the problem and then solve that issue with a targeted solution, you've got much more chance of being successful, rather than going to one of the mega names and saying, can you help me with all of this, all of my financial crime problems? It's much clearer to say, I've got a particular ID and V problem, or I've got an enhanced due diligence problem, or a KYC, and looking to the more nimble solutions which can fix that and then connect back out with better data. So I do think historically, these programs that have run for 3, 5, 7 years, very, very difficult to work out what success actually is, because they often never end, because the business is moving so fast that once you've fixed it, it needs fixing again. So it's very challenging.
So that's what I liked about your presentation. You're reminding us it's more than just AML, it's more than just a bit of client stuff. It's our clients exist in a whole range of scams, and we have a role. Well, we have a role in those scams. I'll leave you to reparse that, and it's our job to make sure that role is removed. So there. Got time for just 2 more questions, I think. Well, actually 3. Quick one. Hugh Purser wants to know where does the name P2 come from? It's not too late to lodge the question.
My chairman, his name is Pip Peel, so it's P2 is the second iteration of his companies.
Great. Andrew Churchill, aren't many of the trusted sources, such as DVLA, only verifying that they're holding accurate data on falsely obtained genuine credentials, merely confirming that it's organized crime rather than amateurs?
Yeah, I think it is an ongoing challenge, and those secure and trusted data sources need to keep improving. Companies House will be another one that's got an awful lot to do to get it back up to scratch. But there are elements of the central sources that can be relied upon and accessed. I think you don't want to. The new stuff now is actually you don't want to give someone your whole driver's license. You just want them to confirm your date of birth so they can access the portion of your secure record that's relevant to them only, rather than giving your name, date of birth, address, or whether you can drive a truck or not. Most companies don't need to know that. They're just trying to verify one particular data key point. So I think that secure access to specific data elements will come to the fore as well.
Okay. And a final one. You titled your presentation, "What Keeps the Financial Crime Professionals Up Late at Night?" But what would actually happen that would reverse the table? What would make it the case, in your opinion, that it would all be the financial criminals who are being kept up awake at night?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think they probably are, but for different reasons. So if you're on the end of one of these phishing networks, then you're probably worried about your server farm staying up and running so that you can hit another 100,000 overnight. You're probably sadly worried about whether the resources that you coerced into working for you via various different means are going to stay alive long enough to hit the keyboards for another 8 hours. So I think they face different challenges, and often challenges that we're probably glad that we don't face ourselves, to be honest.
Okay. Well, it is really a fascinating subject, and sadly, we've run to time. So I really appreciate it, and very kind of you to share all of this and really raise the awareness and the alertness of all of us. And you've touched on so many other important issues like education and the continuance of it, but our role and responsibility in all this. So thank you. But if I might, just 3 quick rounds of thanks. Firstly, as ever, to our sponsors, including, may I point out, P2. And thank you very much for your generosity in allowing us to intellectually wander where we will. I would like to thank the audience. You've been super today, lots of good interaction. I think we got through most of your questions. This week we have 3 days of employee share ownership. You're welcome to join. That's Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And on Friday, we're going to be looking at artificial intelligence and the markets. But as ever, check out the website. That's the ultimate authoritative aspect, if you can find our genuine website itself. But if you really want to find it with ultimate security, may I recommend Phil and his team. And Phil, thank you so much. I'm afraid in today's technology doesn't really permit tumultuous applause. So I have my little Korean karmic clapper here, which we'll have to do as a sad substitute. But we thank you so much for coming, and we look forward to developments as we fight this important menace, shall I say.
Thanks, Michael. Cheers, guys.
Good. Thanks for coming aboard.
Cheers.